A few weeks ago, Viltrox brought a new full-frame lens to the market, and for a long time that's not only one for beginners or for the budget market. This is the 135mm f1.8 lab from Viltrox, and after the 60mm 1.8, it's the second full-frame lens that's more aimed at professionals. With 135mm and an aperture of 1.8, it's a classic portrait focal length. It positions itself between the very affordable Samyang and the expensive Sony G Master. And let's get this out of the way up front. In terms of optical performance, it might just nail that spot. But let's take a closer look. I'm David, you are watching The Vision, and let's go. Viltrox has in the recent years made attempts at products that don't just target the budget market. Notable highlights for me include the 75mm 1.2 Pro and the 27mm 1.2 Pro for APS-C. And the 60mm 1.8 for E-mount and Z-mount is nearly unbeatable at this price and has almost no competition on Z-mount. The new 135 1.8 is supposed to cost 1,200 euros regularly here in Europe. That's steep. 1,000 euros when imported from China, but it has already been sold in recent weeks for around 800 euros as import with some Black Friday deals. For now, it's only available in Sony's E-mount, but I can imagine it's also coming to Z-mount at some point, just like the other Viltrox full-frame lenses, and would be a welcome alternative to Nikon's expensive Plina lens. As you might have already seen, the lens is pretty large and heavy. It weighs hefty 1.24 kilograms and measures 146mm in length and 93mm in diameter. It's quite a beast. On some Sony bodies, things could get tight with this lens, leaving barely any room for fingers between the grip and the lens. For comparison, this is almost as heavy as Canon's 28-72.0, and Sony's 135 G Master is 300 grams lighter and significantly slimmer. Samyang's lens, on the other hand, has the same diameter but is much shorter and significantly light at 772 grams. So this is the heaviest representative of its kind. The question, of course, is wherever you can feel this weight in its build quality, and my verdict on this is sort of. The barrel is made of metal. The housing is even sealed against environmental influences with a rubber lip at the mount, and the first impression is very good. The two rings make a good impression in terms of rubberization, and the focus ring has a pleasant rotational resistance. But the switches don't feel particularly good. There's one for AF/MF, there's also a focus limiter, very practical for a lens like this, and one switch to make the clicks of the aperture ring turn on and off. The second ring is indeed an aperture ring. You will not see it at first glance because it's not a classical aperture ring. Instead, it works in combination with the display on the lens, and to be honest, I find that quite annoying. I'm not personally a user of aperture rings, so I strongly prefer it when the aperture ring can just be locked to the A position. Yeah, allowing me to adjust the aperture just via my usual camera body dials. But that's not really possible here. The A position is reached by turning the ring to the right, but can be left again by turning the ring to the left with just 4 clicks. This means that if you accidentally touch the ring and turn it 4 clicks, the lens will change the aperture from 1.8 to aperture 16. Then you turn it back to A, then you are on aperture 4, requiring you to use the body styles to get back to 1.8. This lens seems designed by someone who has never actually photographed before with such lens. Since the lens is so large and heavy, you need to support it with one hand, which often ends up touching the aperture ring. That's great. On top of that, the display could have been better used. While you can save A and B focus points by using buttons on the lens and switch between them with a press, it's too fast for my liking, especially for video. I would have liked at least a depth of field scale on the display as well, as we had with Batis lenses and also with the 60mm 1.8, which could be easily calculated from the aperture and the focus distances. And with a fully digital lens, I'd also like the option to change the rotation direction of these rings. The lens is compatible with Viltrox smartphone app, where you can play with boot animations and the little display, and you can also update the firmware via Bluetooth to the lens. But anyway, Apart from the wobbly buttons, there's something else I have to complain about. This lens uses a VCM autofocus motor, which means that once again it rattles when switched off. The focus group inside of this lens is not held in position and moves around inside the lens. It's similar to Canon's RF35 1.4 VCM, although it's quite better damped here. The autofocus, unfortunately, is also not the quietest I've experienced. In photo mode you can slightly hear it working. It's not really disruptive, but you can hear it. But in video, if you like using 135mm, you will hardly hear it at all. Optically speaking, we are talking about 14 elements in 9 groups and a diaphragm plate for the aperture of 11 rounded blades, which can be clearly seen here. This is slightly more complex optically than Samyang's or Sony's 135 1.8 lenses. What I've always appreciated about the 135mm lenses compared to the portrait 85mm lenses is the good minimum focusing distance, which is here only 72 centimeters. This is better than most of the 85mm lenses I've tested so far. Combined with the good focal length, you get significantly closer, making it perfect for classical headshot use. But let's take a look at what the lens can do and whether it justifies its weight in terms of sharpness and optical performance. But before we examine sharpness, don't forget to like, subscribe and hit the bell, and feel free to check out my Instagram as well. Optically, this lens has impressed me across the board. Even wide open 1.8, it's sharp from edge to edge, with the center being particularly outstanding. So much that the 61 megapixel sensor of my A7R5 starts showing moire effects in roof structures. Something I've never seen there before. The Samyang in contrast is sharp enough for portraits, especially in the center, assuming you get a good copy, but it's nowhere near as sharp as the Viltrox version, especially at the edges and also not in the center at all. That said, sample variation is always a factor also with Viltrox lenses as well. So it's unlikely that 3 units of the same model will perform identically for Samyang and for Viltrox. In any case here, stopping down slightly to f2.8 yields sharpness performance that's nearly unbeatable. The moire effect even becomes more pronounced in this case. Taking portraits with the Viltrox 135mm 1.8 lab was a lot of fun. I love the look of this focal length, the ability to isolate the subject completely from the background, the compression from the telephoto focal length and the natural rendering of people, and of course the ability to get really close for headshots thanks to the excellent minimum focusing distance compared to an 85mm length. But there are some other important characteristics of a lens, such as chromatic aberrations, lateral CRs, that is, bright colored contrast edges, didn't show up in my portraits and I couldn't even provoke them with my tree against the sky tests. That's very good. Though the Samyang was similarly free of issues here. As with any lens, with wide open apertures, there's always longitudinal chromatic aberrations, shortly LOCA. It's color fringing in the foreground and background blur. They are present here but remain subtle and not particularly distracting for me. Once again, the sharpness is impressive. You can clearly see here in this example the individual fibers of the paper from the book. Extremely important for a portrait lens, of course, is the bokeh. And in this case, it's absolutely top notch. It's clean and clear bokeh circuits, without onion rings, without inconsistencies, and impressively round even towards the edges of the frame. Maybe that's something good from such a big lens. Stopping down to f2.8 still remains beautiful round bokeh bolts. There's no cat's eye shape anymore, and in practice the bokeh is even more impressive. Foreground and background blur are pleasantly soft with smooth transitions into and out of focus. And even challenging foliage doesn't create distracting backgrounds here. Overall, the lens's look is fantastic. Excellent sharpness, wide open, superb contrasts, great subject isolation. I love the look. It's almost a dream lens if it weren't so heavy. And correction profiles aren't necessarily either here. There's no distortion at all. And only very minimal pleasant vignetting. In fact, I even often added more of vignetting for the shooted portraits here myself. By comparison, the Samyang had significantly stronger vignetting, even though its distortion was similarly well controlled. When it comes to backlit portraits, there's not so much to criticize either here. While budget manufacturers often cut corners on the lens's coatings, here it results in a pleasant flare with side lighting and some contrast loss when the light source is directly in the frame. But this is acceptable and can even look quite nice if you are using it controlledly. Ghosting, the internal reflections of the lens remain pretty controlled. You can see them, but they are not distracting here. It's clear that this isn't Sony G Master level of performance, but it's a decent effort that contributes to the charm and character of this lens. The autofocus on this lens performed very well for me. On my A7R5 for portraits, it was a charm. But portraits are rarely a challenging task. It's quite predictable, so most lenses handle this easily. I also tried photographing the mandarin ducks at our bridge here in town, which is a more demanding scenario, and the autofocus worked reliably here too. 2 years ago, my biggest complaint about the Samyang 135mm 1.8 was its autofocus, because it wasn't working so well. It had out-of-focus eyes when the eye was clearly detected. Not so much here in this case with the Viltrox, but maybe Samyang improved via firmware in the recent years. Also, Viltrox provides a USB-C port on the back of the lens, making firmware updates quick and straightforward without the need for a dock. You can also upgrade the firmware via app with the Bluetooth connection to the lens. It's quite unique. The downside, however, is that the autofocus is somewhat audible in photo mode, like I said and showed before. And also, the VCM motor rattles when the lens is switched off. For videos, I don't see the 135mm as primary use case. It's possible, of course, but you have to be prepared for noticeable focus briefing during focus pulls. But as I said, this isn't really the point of this lens and of a lens like this. In conclusion, the optical performance of the lens has thoroughly impressed me. It clearly outperforms the Samyang. It's significantly sharper, it has less vignetting, and I would even say it boosts a better bokeh performance and a more pleasant behavior in backlit scenarios. There's very little to criticize about this optics. And if you find the lens on sale for 800 euros or less, I would even prefer it over the twice as expensive Sony G Master. Though unfortunately, I haven't tested that one yet. But there's no way it could be much better than this one. Except perhaps in the backlit situations where coating matters. What clearly bothers me about the Viltrox is just plainly its size and weight, as well as these quirks in handling. A traditional aperture ring would be really much preferred, like the one on the 60mm 1.8. And I don't get why lenses need displays in this day and age. But of course, that's somewhat a matter of personal preferences. You can't go very wrong with a purchase here. Though that means if you can handle the size and weight of the lens. At the end, when you don't take the lens with you, since it's too big and too heavy to carry around, it will just be a waste of money. But if you are okay with that and the price drops further, it could become one of the best budget portrait lenses on the market. Much like the 60mm 1.8 is one of the best budget wide angles available. I would love to see it for Nikon as well, this one here, because in comparison to the Plena, it would be so much cheaper. Links to this lens can be found below the video in the description. And if you make a purchase through these links, you support the channel for free, helping to ensure I can continue making such videos for you. Also, feel free to check out my Instagram to see more of my work. I hope you enjoyed this video. If so, don't forget to like, subscribe and hit the bell. And here are 2 more videos you can watch next. That's it for me from today. See you next time.